Welcome everybody to our second day of the SCORE conference on supporting consumer co-ownership in renewable energies and challenges to be met in this regard. Yesterday we already had a first successful day with many interesting speakers. We focused mainly on the SCORE project, its results, all cities involved, pilots, but also follower cities. We had a look at the regulatory framework and which is the RED 2, the Renewable Energy Directive 2. And today we're going to dive a little bit more into detail on some of the most important issues that were raised yesterday, but also during the last 3.5 years during the SCORE project. And this is, for example, the energy sharing, electricity sharing, but also, of course, the transposition of directives involved into national law. My name is Kleeschulte. I'll be moderating today and guiding you through this day, the second day of the conference. I work at Climate Alliance, which is a network of municipalities. And we have our first speaker today. It's my pleasure to welcome Achille, who works at DG Energy of the European Commission in his unit in the unit of consumers, local initiatives, and just transition. And within his unit, he follows closely the transposition of the Electricity Market Directive, which is also closely related, of course, to the setup of renewable energy communities and our business model, the CSUP, that has been tested in the SCORE project. And hopefully, and I'm sure that he will be able to give us an insight into the transposition process of the clean energy package by the EU and give us some insights about the perspective of transposition from the Commission side. So without any further introduction, please, Achille, if you would like to switch on your camera, and also if once Sarah stops sharing her screen, then I'll invite you to share your slides and to give us a short introduction. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be here at this final conference of SCORE. I think it's quite valuable work that is being conducted here, finding business models for renewable energy communities as they were introduced in the European legislation, and more precisely Renewable Energy Directive. I was already briefly introduced, so my name is Achille Hannoset from DG ENER. I'm following the energy community files quite closely, in particular citizen energy communities, which sits in the Electricity Market Directive. And for renewable energy communities, I work closely together with my colleague Vjeran from C1, Unit C1 within DG ENER. Now, what I will do today is I will give you a brief introduction to the legal framework at the European level for both these entities. And I will also identify some implementation pathways. What I cannot do at this stage is clearly give you any details on the transposition at member state level. This is a process that is ongoing, and we cannot give any normative judgment on this, nor disclose any information as it is deemed sensitive at this stage. Now, what I can do is I can identify some implementations that we found along the way and show you how to operationalize some of the provisions in the EU legal framework. Now, when I do that, it's important to understand that this is not an identification of best practices. It's nor an identification of the preferred way of implementing it. It is rather an illustration of what an implementation could look like without making a normative judgment on its full compliance or not. So with that being said, I think we can kick off. I would say, because this was explicitly also asked by Jens, why was the RED 2 not reviewed for renewable energy communities? I think the answer can be short there. The legal framework is now being transposed, we see that there are some member states that are still lagging behind, even though the deadline has already passed. But we think that it's important to see the effect on the ground of the provisions that we introduced in the Renewable Energy Directive Part 2 before we start making changes to the concept already. I think that is the main reason why we decided not to open up the concept for the review of the Renewable Energy Directive Part 2. All right, and if we go then to the EU legal framework itself, of course, we start with the legal concept itself. We have the citizen energy communities, which are enshrined in the Electricity Market Directive, and renewable energy communities, which are enshrined in the Renewable Energy Directive. Now, what we see is that these entities share a common core. They can both operate on the renewable electricity market. They can take any type of legal entity, so they can be a partnership, limited liability company, cooperative. It really depends on the company law at national level that is in place, which type of entities they can take. Now, what's important is that it has to be organized through a legal entity. So it cannot be a purely contractual relationship between partners that, for example, engage in collective self-consumption. Then we have a democratic component, you might say, in terms of participation. It needs to be open. So that means at any time, eligible party can knock on the door of the energy community and say, hey, I want to join. Of course, there are some caveats there. Usually you will have to pay a certain fee, an entry fee, to purchase the shares. And this varies, let's say, between 200, 500, but even at the beginning, sometimes these numbers go all the way to 2,000, 3,000 euros. So de facto, it might not be as open always, especially for those citizens that are in a more energy poor or vulnerable state. It needs to be voluntary. So if I am no longer satisfied with the services of the energy community, it should be perfectly possible for me to leave. Again, here we see in practice that a balance is actually struck between voluntary and making the business case, of course. If you want to a certain extent retain your members when you made an initial investment in order to make sure that you also have a return on it. Then we have the purpose, which is quite important as well, as it relates, I personally believe, to the just transition. They both need to provide environmental, economic, or social benefits to the community or the local area where it operates, rather than financial profits. Now, that can take a variety of shapes. Socially, it is observed that energy communities sometimes have established a community fund, and the funds, they recycle and reinvest in social activities, local swimming pools, sponsoring local football clubs, things like that can be imagined. Economically, I think what's quite important as well, energy communities, they do create also employment opportunities when they start professionalizing. And environmental, of course, is the more obvious one, you might say, is contributing to climate change mitigation, but also potentially reducing local pollution. That is the shared core of these two entities. Now, if we look at the differences between the two of them, what we see is that, citizen energy communities are technology neutral. So in principle, they operate in the electricity market as a secondary energy source, and electricity can come from fossil fuels, but also renewables. Now, the reason why there is a higher level of flexibility there as well, and I already said it, it relates to flexibility. You might argue So even in the electricity market, even if it's fossil fuel based, energy communities can still provide valuable flexibility services to the grid that in the end contributes to a cost-effective energy transition. For renewable energy communities, as the name implies, it's only renewable energy based. However, it is quite a flexible concept in that sense. So it can be based in the heat sector, it can be based in the electricity sector, but it can also be based in the gas market. In terms of entities that are eligible to participate for citizen energy communities, it's wide open. Any entity may participate. So this can also be large companies. For renewable energy communities, this is really limited to citizens, local authorities, such as municipalities, or small and medium-sized enterprises. And for small and medium-sized enterprises, their participation cannot be their primary activity. This is to some extent a bit of a safeguard provision against the setup of proxy communities. Communities that exist out of companies that are purely set up for the sake of having an energy community, but then are affiliated to a larger undertaking, which could potentially jeopardize the effective control of the community itself. So we see a significant difference there in terms of eligibility. For effective control, in contrast, for citizen energy communities, the requirement is a little bit more strict. So this is really limited to citizens, local authorities, and small enterprises. So this requirement kind of compensates the fact that it's initially also wide open to all type of entities. And connected to that, and I'll say that immediately, is that you don't have any decision-making power for large energy companies. So they can participate, but they cannot have any decision-making power, which is quite important, because in the end, the citizen energy community should not be a vehicle for large energy undertakings to have a new economic source of income. It should really be rooted in the community, and it should consist out of rather non-professional entities, entities that are not that familiar with the energy sector. For renewable energy communities, we see that the actors that are eligible to participate, they are also eligible to be in effective control, and that is then linked to this proximity requirement. The proximity requirement really ensures that renewable energy communities can, as they are defined in the literature, can be equated with local energy communities. So the members in effective control need to be located in proximity of the production installations that are owned and developed by the renewable energy community. Excuse me. How this element of proximity is defined is something that we will get back to quite soon. And then we have autonomy, and I already had quite an interesting exchange on that with Jens. What is the interpretation of this concept of autonomy? What does it mean? What does it add as an additional layer? It's not defined in the recital, so in principle there is leeway for member states to interpret and implement this concept. However, what I would say as a bare minimum, how we see it at our level, is that it is a safeguard against external interest. So it's an additional protection or a layer that ensures that when renewable energy communities get into partnerships or contracts with suppliers or other production companies that are already vested in the market, that they are not bound by those contracts indefinitely, for example, so that they become too dependent of the services of the company and subsequently also which would subsequently potentially undermine the independence of their decision-making internally as well. So that to clarify that concept from our perspective. Now, if we look at implementation pathways for the element of proximity for renewable energy communities, we see some different approaches that have been taken across the European landscape. We see network-based, administrative-based, distant-based, ad hoc, or hybrid. Network-based seems to be the one that is quite popular currently. The reason for that, and you can read yourself, it's downstream of the high and or medium voltage electricity transformer station, behind the same low voltage transformer station, etc. It's really in line with grid topology. Now, the reason why this is done most of the time is because it's a way of also ensuring that the renewable energy community can engage in collective self-consumption and sharing at the local level, local distribution level. What is important to specify there is that the full equation with grid topology might be restricting the activities of renewable energy communities too much. It's true, if they want to engage in self-consumption, it makes sense to bind it or connect it to the grid topology and make sure that they're at the same behind the same, let's say, low voltage transformer station. But as soon as the renewable energy community engages in supply, it might actually be better to have a bit of a flexibility in terms of geographical scope as well, in order to enhance their business case and to make sure that members can come from farther away as well. Of course, not nationwide, as this is the function of citizen energy communities. We have the administrative component. So this is really how politically boundaries are struck within the nation. Here we see an interesting example in Greece at district level. The benefits of such a flexible interpretation is that you can really allow you allow for different type of technology to come in, right? You can imagine a renewable energy community in a city context where there is really no room to build a wind farm very close by. At district level, there is this possibility where you can build a wind farm in a rural or more rural area, and then subsequently have the renewable energy community situated in the city. So that's the real advantage of such an approach. We have the distant-based, that is also related to collective self-consumption often. We see that in France currently being the case. We have ad hoc, which is quite an interesting approach. Really, it depends, like you go to the authorities and you say, okay, we have this business model, we have this technology that we want to have, and this is our geographical context. And on the basis of that, the authority can judge how flexible they will interpret the requirement of proximity. And finally, you can make combinations of these approaches, and a way to do that is, for example, defining proximity in relation to the activity that is being exercised by the renewable energy community, so collective self-consumption, supply, storage, these things. So if we go to the enabling framework, there we see at the European level, based on the logic that I explained to you about the legal concept. So the citizen energy communities, it's clear in terms of participation, it's a little bit more open, a little bit less strict in terms of requirements. And they are coupled to this framework of rights and responsibilities that facilitate market integration. And it mostly relates to procedures, tariffs that are subsequently also connected to activities. For renewable energy communities, we saw a bit more strict criteria in order to be eligible to participate. And because of that, we also allocated them specific privileges. Privileges that do not apply for the citizen energy community, only for the renewable energy community. That's access to financial instrument and information, the facilitation thereof, support schemes that take into account specificities of the renewable energy communities, the removal of unjustified barriers and the scoping for administrative and regulatory barriers, and regulatory and capacity building support for public authorities, which will have an important role to play, of course, in indirectly or directly participating in a renewable energy community at the local level. Then we have quite a novel activity, which I like to highlight as well, is energy sharing. So this is enabled for the citizen energy community and the renewable energy community, also for the renewable self-consumer, but I won't get into that too much today. What we see is that what can be shared is the electricity produced by the community-owned production units. And well, what we see in terms of charges, tariffs, and levies is that, in principle, they are not exempt from any of the charges. When they use, or the tariffs, when they use the distribution network to share, they will also subsequently carry that burden. It's of course, again, debatable whether in certain instances where the energy community really is locally situated and has a pattern of consuming what is produced locally at the same instant, it could be argued that a deviation from transmission system related tariffs could be justified, but that is something for member states to further look into. What to say about energy sharing? It can be physical at the local level, but it can also be facilitated virtually through an online platform, of which many are being developed also under the impulse of Horizon 2020. Implementation pathways, we see one in Luxembourg and Austria being developed at this stage. So Luxembourg already has a sharing key that energy communities can use, and this has been developed by the DSO and the regulator. So if they use that one, it's a static one, and renewable energy communities have the possibility to be responsible for the attribution themselves. And there again, a delegation to a third party would be possible. A service company can be, an energy service company can be imagined in this regard. For Austria, we see that there is a flexible and a dynamic and a static sharing key. And there the DSO is at all times responsible for the attribution. The renewable energy communities cannot be. So that is quite an interesting differences there and ways of operationalizing this provision. For Austria as well, it's important to note that they have decided to grant some exemptions from transmission system related tariffs, which results in reduced grid tariffs for the activity of energy sharing. In terms of procedures, I already mentioned it: fair, proportionate, non-discriminatory and transparent procedures. So these requirements are actually already part of our market framework, but we reiterate them for the energy communities in order to make member states rethink how they have structured their legal market design, which is traditionally more prone to large incumbents. Now, what does that mean in practice? We're talking about grid access procedures, we're talking about production and supply licensing and registration procedures. Now, production and supply related procedures, we see some interesting things happening at member state level as well already. So you have an exemption from the obligation to pay the annual fee for retaining an electricity production license. You have the transfer of production licenses for production installations exclusively owned by the energy community within the same region. You have the minimum supply licensing capital that is reduced, for example, to 60,000 in the case of Greece. So these are all things that can be contemplated for energy communities at member state level, because in light of these principles of proportionality and non-discrimination. And there it's important, of course, to understand it all links back to this concept. Like, in essence, it consists out of non-professional actors. They are limited in resources, and they are limited in time. These people, they're doing the energy community project on the site mostly, in addition to daily jobs and a family life. So in light of those characteristics, some of these reductions are also worthy of being contemplated. Then we have the grid access procedures. The enduring connection policy part 2 in Ireland is quite interesting here. So the applications may be submitted at any time. Normally it's in specific time windows. The building permit is not required in order to apply for a connection, and there's also the possibility to retain the connection capacity for 2 years in order to be able to obtain a building permit in the meantime. Obtaining a building permit can be a very long-stretching, rigorous process, especially if it goes through all the bodies of appeal. And then the reduction of the initial application fee deposit can also be contemplated, and has been contemplated, or has been introduced in Greece, in Ireland, my apologies. Then tools to facilitate access to finance and information. Here again, Ireland has something in place already for sustainable energy communities. It's quite important to note here that sustainable energy communities is a very liberal interpretation. There's not that many governance requirements attached to it, and so not entirely relatable to the European concepts. Nevertheless, the journey that they have planned out for these sustainable energy initiatives, which are mostly about actually energy efficiency measures, but can also be about production, is a 3-step program. It's a learn, plan, do. Learn, you get to know other people that are interested in setting up an energy community. You get to know projects that are already at a more mature stage, and you can get inspired. The next step is that you start planning. You develop this energy master plan, and from the government there is assistance to develop your business model as well, depending on the geographical characteristics and the wants of the community and the motivation of the community itself. And finally, there's the do, where you really put it all into practice, you implement it, and there's also a possibility to get access to funding. Then the support scheme that takes into account the specificities. We see, again in Ireland, this preference category, like a ring-fenced capacity. So everything is auction-based still, competitive procedure, but a certain amount of capacity, up to 30 gigawatt-hour, is reserved for energy communities, and they can compete for that capacity between themselves. So you still have a bit of a competition check on the amount of subsidies that are allocated, which is arguably justified in order to not disproportionately burden the taxpayer, of course, as well. And then you have the exemption from requirements to post bid bonds and to submit performance security. All right, that was it. I hope I kept within my time. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And let's, of course, keep in touch through all of these different social media and websites available. And I thank you.
Thank you, Achille. That was a very interesting and great introduction again, and not only an introduction into the concepts of citizen and energy communities and renewable energy communities, but much more than that also. I think it was really interesting to see the different implementation pathways that the countries have taken. There is one question in the chat. I don't know if you can answer that, but Angelo Nolilli is asking if member states are lagging behind in transposition, is there a way for citizens or local groups to push their member states? Do you know if there is, or would you encourage this, or can you say anything in this regard from your perspective, or is it a process that is still ongoing?
What I can say about that particular question is that rights can be derived from directives that are transposed late. Apologies, I need to turn my webcam for a second. So member states, so rights can be derived from directives that are transposed too late, to the extent that the provisions are unambiguous and clear upon reading them. Let's say that certain principles of proportionality and fairness and non-discrimination in terms of rights in relation to procedures is not always very unambiguous and really requires implementation at the national level. And thus I would argue that these type of provisions don't give direct rights, even though the transposition is late. That is my legal opinion. I am not representing the Commission with saying this, of course. Do note that. Thank you.
Thank you, Achille. Yes, maybe also some of the other speakers do have an opinion on this, and because I know that many of them are really closely involved also from the legal side, especially in looking at these transposition processes, and we'll have a specific panel also on the question of regulatory issues and experiences from the member states. So maybe those speakers can also refer to this question, because I'm sure that this is of course a question that is at the heart and mind of many of our participants today, who have really embraced this concept of renewable energy communities and would wish, of course, for a perfect transposition, let's say, into national law. So thank you again, Achille. I think this was a great introduction, and I don't want to keep too much time, but give the floor to Dörte Fouquet, who is the director of the European Renewable Energy Federation, EREF, and she will build on what you said, I think, also regarding electricity and energy sharing, and also the role and relationship of distribution system operators and renewable energy communities, and how those actors are cooperating and in the field at the moment. So Dörte, the floor is yours, and I think Sarah will share your slides for you. Just let us know when you would like to go to the next one.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you everybody that I can participate and representing EREF and some thoughts we have on EREF side. I'm director at EREF and representing the interest of small and medium-sized renewable energy along the value chain since decades now in Brussels. And EREF is, the voice of independent power producer from all renewable sources. We have been involved in the SCORE concept, and we work closely together with our colleagues under the SCORE framework, but also with ResCoop and similar associations. And we were highly involved in all legislative processes since EREF's beginning over 20 years ago. And also in the secondary and tertiary legislation as the state aid guidelines, or legislation as the state aid guidelines, which are now on discussion. And I would like to say some words to that also in the end. Before we start the slides, as I'm a lawyer in my profession, and EREF is a very long, wonderful client, I might like to say something to the question in the chat on the applicability of the rules under the Renewable Energy Directive 2 when member states haven't transposed. So as has been said before, the established rule is that if member states are lagging behind, the question or for example, a community which cannot use the privileges which are enshrined now in our RED II, especially, and also in the Internal Energy Market Directive, they can refer to them directly. So what I would do is, in that case, to go to court in the respective country, and impose your right directly from the directive. That's usual way. That makes member states sit up. Then the court might have a question of interpretation, and that is also an interesting way, because then the court will ask the European Court of Justice, ECJ, directly in those preliminary procedures, and then the court gives its view, the European Court of Justice, I mean, and then this goes back, and it is also helping to tailor the questions which may be asked and the answers given by the European Court may also help us in the execution of the Renewable Directive. The directive, there has to be a failure to transpose in time. It is more easy to get your right when it's not a directive but a regulation. But again, there is established case law that you do not have to wait until doomsday that your member state is behaving. In parallel, I would always advise to go into complaint to the European Commission. There's an easy platform. I have just assisted some weeks ago a German community energy association to go this pathway. And that is very easy to be done. It's a little bit more tricky to follow up, because you have to introduce it fairly easy, upload it online to the Secretary General of the Commission. Then the Secretary General looks who is the best unit to handle the case. And there you must be a bit careful that things are really followed up, but that's usual procedure. So maybe that in the beginning. And that leads me also to thank Achille, because actually I can now only, with the next slides, go a little bit into the thoughts of us when it comes to the distribution level and the renewable energy communities. And with that, I like that we go to the next slide, maybe. And I think, yeah, voila. So we have heard it already. It has been, I think it was one of the most interesting fights, challenges in my career I had on the RED II, because it was an interesting coalition of like-minded people within the Commission and outside the Commission. And the winter package at that time and put citizens first. And this was a notion in the energy world which hadn't been heard before. So, and thanks to many of us, and I can say that we all helped to fight this through, but it was not that we only found deaf ears in the Commission, far from it, and that was helpful. We have this mismatch with the wording, citizen energy communities, and naturally the renewable energy communities have always said citizen energy communities, fair enough, but fossil gas endeavors or something from the old world, no. But that's water under the bridge now. So what we have is the right to generate, self-consume, store, and sell renewable energy and participate in those communities, as Achille has given a wonderful overview. So we can continue on that. This is actually now an old timer. EREF in the run-up to under the winter package and the question of targets and the potential of member states in the EU and the EU overall. We had worked together with CE, the University in Delft, that they look a little bit more into the potential of citizen-owned electricity if the surrounding framework is helpful and flexible enough, and that was at that time, so 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, they foresaw that there will remain a big portion of small and medium-sized enterprises who can be active in the market by 2050, households will play an increasing role. I mean, 23% is a large chunk, and we are talking at that time we focused on electricity. We'll do the same exercise, I hope, next year on energy. And then 37% of cooperatives, and yeah, public buildings. Again, I think we should look into that again on the heating side. I think their public buildings can have also a better share. So there is a lot still from transition from the bottom up potential. So we can, yeah, danke. On the DSO sector, so the internal market directives, the IEMD, allows member states to grant energy communities to operate distribution networks, precisely citizens' energy communities. That's regulated under Article 22. There may not be a lot who will try this because there are lots of, let's say, red tape requirements and obligations those district system operators must fulfill. Whereas in the Renewable Energy Directive, Article 16, renewable energy communities are not supposed to become active in distribution. But if you look into history of especially rural electrification, there was always a natural alignment or a natural bond that in Germany, Spain, Italy, Austria, that energy cooperatives like the mill in the village would not only operate the mill, but would also provide the electricity to the surrounding. My great-grandfather in a village in Steinfeld in Schleswig-Holstein, in a tiny village, he had built a substantial big mill early of end of the century before and early last century. And naturally, he also electrified the village, and farmers were also involved in the mill business. So it was a natural process. And what we are now facing maybe a little bit an obstacle from a liberal, market liberal point of view, logic development under the Internal Energy Market Directive to say, okay, we don't want to have any more monopolistic behavior, so we should distinguish between the different activities alongside the value chain. But there's now, especially with more and more decentralized and also more and more renewable energy community-driven business, we have to think this over. This has been meant to break up the likes of E.ON and EDF, but it should not hinder a renewable energy community which has the provisions which Achille just said. And then we can go to the next slide, maybe. So the requirements for member states, I think Achille has said that we have to have a lot of enabling frameworks for renewable energy communities, access and management of data, who is metering the data, network tariffs, who pays for the grid use, what's happening when you have less wind, less sun, you know all this, you work with all these occurrences, let's say. And then what's about demand response and aggregation and the role of renewable energy communities? E-vehicle charging infrastructure will become one of the backbones of the work of renewable energy communities. I can hardly foresee that you do a major REX project just building a windmill. There is a lot now around it in order to tap the benefit as locally as possible and with the cheapest or with the most efficient effort, let's say that. We can continue. So DSOs, it also depends, the district system. I think if my personal view is that if you have district systems which were historically always close to the community, these systems, and we can see examples of that all over Europe, where such history exists, or has not been bulldozed away like it had been mostly in France after Second World War. in those historically connected systems, you do have communal power suppliers who are eager even to engage with renewable energy communities. There are hiccups. Jens is only living with hiccups, I know, at the moment, even in established community power situations like in Germany. But nonetheless, that is a different tissue. So I could foresee those things work better in more decentralized DSO countries and with the communal power than in countries who had extinguished communal power to a large part. So that is our pathway. We have to see, we have to work together with the Commission, and that brings me also to the practicalities. We will now have RED 3 sometime on the line next year. The work is going on. Has started in the Parliament, etc., and in Council. The Commission is the loyal observer and helper. On the other hand, we do have a time frame which is very tight, 2030. So if you would wait for RED 3 enforcement with decisions for renewable energy communities, you would be badly advised. On the other hand, and the future of our globe would suffer. On the other hand, we should look into what renewable RED 2 foresees for the review process by the European Commission. And there are some stepping stones, and most of them are by 2023. And we might discuss with the Commission if, for the sake of climate provisions and the bad outcome from Glasgow, I would say, which was not unsurprising, we might ask the Commission to have an entente with the Council to push the first reporting already to 2022 and to look at these points especially, because it was the Commission who helped us to come into the play with established rules. So we can continue.
Dörte, you have 1 more minute.
Yeah, I have 1 more minute, and that minute I will use for saying that there's always the grapevine. And I also want to use this occasion to thank all our colleagues in DG Competition in the respective units, and also naturally in DG Energy. They have apparently worked well and hard to improve the current draft of the state aid guidelines. It's only grapevine, and I do not have the leaked draft or anything else. I really don't have it. But what I heard is that there is also, again, for our renewable energy communities, it seems to get on the much better way than we had foreseen before when it comes, for example, for thresholds on auctioning. And with that, I just wanted to end on a more positive note. I hope now is inter-service consultation that there is no backdoor, sorry for that wording, deterioration. And naturally, I would hope for much more, but I think we can be slightly optimistic that we get better rules than we had feared before. Thank you.
Thank you, Dörte. I think it's always a pleasure to hear you speak and to listen to your intervention. So thanks again. This was also really interesting what you just said on the state aid guidelines, which is a process that's still ongoing, of course, and we're looking forward to when it really comes out. So we have a question in the chat, but we will have them all together after the 3 interventions. So because they all build on each other, and maybe we can answer some questions together. So with that, the floor is yours, Professor Lowitzsch. I'm not going to introduce you for too long. You are, of course, a SCORE coordinator from Vjeran University in Frankfurt Oder, and you are going to tell us a little bit about specific form of renewable energy communities, which are the renewable energy clusters.
Yeah, okay, and that is renewable energy communities, and actually also to a certain extent citizen energy communities and renewable energy clusters. And I think that the question here, or the what I wanted to emphasize, is that these 2 concepts are actually social technical mirrors of the same concept. And what do I mean by that? That is that there are 4 key characteristics which can describe these more ambitious settings in which actually renewable energy communities and to a certain extent citizen energy communities will operate. And we will in a moment hear from a very interesting example from the Netherlands, the Endona cooperative, which my colleague Dominique Doedens will present. So, but let's very quickly look at these four characteristics. So the first one is that we observe complementarity of different renewable energy sources to cope with volatility of our renewable energy generation. And in our opinion, this was not sufficiently acknowledged neither in RED 2 nor in IEMD. So there is still work to do, especially in RED 3. The second characteristic is grid flexibility options, that is storage, demand response, and of course active grid management. And certainly these characteristics don't apply to the smallest projects where the aim is first and foremost self-consumption with only one renewable energy source, but this is all to be seen in this cluster context. The third characteristic is interconnectivity of the different actors, and that is again posing a huge challenge on the governance in these entities, because this in the cluster concept, the heterogeneity is actually where we can tap into the potential, especially when we think about electricity and energy sharing. That is the heterogeneity of the members of an RSC, which fosters the complementarity of their load profiles. And last but not least, of course, we have bidirectionality of energy flows, allowing energy sharing of a portfolio of renewable energy sources, but also peer-to-peer marketing and sale to the grid. And with that, as I said, because we're lagging behind, I will stop here and give the floor immediately to Dominique Doedens, who is giving us an example of such a more advanced project with cluster characteristics from the Netherlands.
Thank you. Dominique Doedens, ESCOZON. We are a cooperative enterprise in the east of the Netherlands, and we are working on flexibility as one of our main goals. The other ones is we also produce new solar parks and also a water central system. We work together with the umbrella cooperative in the Netherlands, Energie Samen, on flexibility. And our goal is that we say flexibility is for cooperatives in the future, for sure, a money-making business. But before we are there, we have a lot of things to do. The dream of a lot of cooperatives is to be autonomous and to have their own system, their own renewable energy, and can also share it with all their members. But in the cruise industry business, it's already there. But for the cooperatives onshore, it's still a big way to go. This is actually the things we want to do. A self-delivery model for the energy, to produce it ourselves, to deliver to the households ourselves, and not by a supplier. The balance of the grids. This is actually where I'm going to talk about the AFFR market. If you see it from in the history, we had to turn on when we produce, and now we changed that we have to use when we produce. And that's a big difference in the world of the electricity business, and we have to change everything to get that done. Together with the TSO, we are working in the Netherlands, that is TenneT. They have three balance systems. The primary reserve, the secondary reserve, and the emergency reserve. And we are working on the second one, the AFFR. What we did in Heeten, it's a small village on the east of the Netherlands, and they have a cooperative, Endona, and we are their advisors, and we help them with all kind of new production plans for solar, but also with batteries and storage. We had a project with 50 households with batteries and C-cell batteries actually, and we are now have a project with the lead-acid battery. And we want, the 3 goals are testing the lead-acid battery if it does what it says it does. The second one is a huge step, and that's making the connection from the solar plant with batteries to the TSO to become a BSP, a balanced service provider. And if we are a balanced service provider, then you are able to work on the market of tenants to balance the net. And that's a huge step, because on this moment in the Netherlands there were only 8 big huge parties who were able to participate on that market. And then we were there, we came and we said we want to participate as well from the competitive side of view. And that was very interesting, because for the TSO, it was, we asked why are we invited to participate? And then the TSO tenant said, because you were representing the inhabitants of the Netherlands. And that was a huge compliment for us to take part in this pilot. And the last step is to become a cooperative aggregator for the cooperatives in the Netherlands. This was the project setup. Endona is the cooperative, ESCOZON, we are their advisors. Energy Next is the platform to connect to the grid and to connect to the tenants. Tenant over here, and Dexter, the forecasting, green and time shift to make the BMS, EMS to the connection, and Centurion batteries, they delivered the 480 batteries. This is the solar park of Endona, nearby the village, more than 7,000 panels, 2.2 megawatt production capacity on a yearly basis. And we are working on the 230 volts and the 50 hertz to help tenants to balance their energy. The work in progress, cables had to be put there, and so as you see, we had 4 of these containers with all 4 of them 120 batteries, and with them we were able to make some energy from the park into the batteries, and later on to deal with it and bring it to the market. 4 containers, this is the container, and those are the inverters who have to do the energy from the DC energy from the solar panels went to the inverters of the solar panels, and then goes to the transformer. From the transformer it goes to those inverters again. From the inverters it goes to the batteries, and if the batteries should then it can be charged afterwards when it has to be delivered to the grid. Then it goes again from the batteries to the inverters, then it becomes the AC, and from the AC it goes to the transformer and it goes to the grid. So you have a lot of transformation from AC, DC, DC, AC, AC, DC. There comes AC, DC probably from. Well, again, the battery containers, they were parallel of 2 batteries were combined together, and so it worked. And it was a setup for the first time that we did this, and now we have a lot of experience and we learned a lot, and with that we are going to implement a new project with again 4 or maybe 6 containers with batteries, and then we are going to again working together with tenants. So you see, it's a lot of complex cable and structure, but it went out well, and we had a good experience with the production of it. It was one thing of this. The production for the charging for the batteries, we in principle only use the production from the solar park. Because if in the Netherlands we should charge from the net, from the grid, then we have to pay a lot of taxes. And then it's the energy cost 20 and nowadays 30, 40 cents a kilowatt hour, and then you don't have a business case anymore. So we decided only to charge from the solar panels. That means that we could only charge during the day and also during a particular part of the day when the sun is shining. Otherwise, it was not enough to charge the batteries for the next night. We have a system, let me say, the EFFR market is a complex market, and it's also a very difficult because you have to have a connection from the batteries to the two tenants on a 4-second base. So every 4 seconds you have to be in contact with tenants. And then if the day ahead you have to say which PTUs, quad hours during a day you can deliver. And so during a day we couldn't deliver because then the solar park is producing and it's on the same grid connection. So we could only deliver when it was evening or night. And if we have to deliver, then we have to deliver within 30 seconds. We have to start with delivering, and then we have a ramp up time of 5 minutes. So you have 5 minutes to come in to full speed, and then you have to deliver at least for 15 minutes 1 megawatt. And that's why we had to put 4 containers with batteries to be able to at least produce or to at least discharge for 1 megawatt at a time to the net. And that was needed for the pre-qualification to possibly become a BSPer.
Dominique, you have around 1 minute left.
Oh, only 1 minute. Okay,
yes.
Well, I have to go fast. Okay, Energy Next is our platform where we work together to get this done. And we worked, these are the pre-qualification tests. First time, this is 1000, so that means 1 megawatt. So the first test, it was all right. But you see here, the second test, it was not 1 megawatt anymore. And the second and the third one, it was the half of it. So we had something to change, the buttons to change on the battery system, on the inverter system, and we worked on it. And this is the production when we were activated from tenants. So we got a bit, we have now to activate our system, and then we did it, and then you get this system. So it worked, and it's very well done to show that it is possible for a cooperative to participate on this EFFR market. Though it is not easy and there has a lot of things to be done. And this is the last test we did for the pre-qualification. It's 0, then we actually, within the time frame of 1 minute, we came to 1000, actually to 1 megawatt delivery of the energy for 1 quad hour. And at this moment, we passed successfully the exam to be possible to become a BSP. And then you get this, because we are the ninth BSP in the Netherlands and able to deliver EFFR for cooperatives in the Netherlands. And the next step will be that we're going to make a next project, WattFlex. And with WattFlex, we are going to aggregate, actually, because for more locations and more cooperatives with windmills or solar parks and batteries, to aggregate their flexibility and bring it to the market. and gain for them a new business model for to get more euros to the cooperatives, so they can continue profitalizing themselves and bring up more new solar plants, windmills, or whatever.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominique.
And this is the last one. And talking. We're making mistakes, and a lot of times, and things have to be going to be new and start again. But at least we have to tell it that cooperatives are able to participate and that we can make new business cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Thanks to you. I think this was a very interesting and a little bit technical, but very interesting explanation into your case and how you support municipalities in the Netherlands. There is one question in the chat. Dörte partly addressed it. It's regarding the barrier assessment that member states need to carry out for as part of the transposition of the RED II, and if it's visible that member states might not be engaging in this barrier assessment enough, and what to do, how to go about it if this barrier assessment is not happening. So Dörte already said, as she also said in her intervention, that it's possible to flag this at the Commission and to engage in the formal complaint procedure. I don't know if there's anyone else from the speakers who would like to comment on the question. Otherwise, I would ask again the speakers of the next panel, who are actually really focusing on the transposition in their countries. We'll have some examples from different member states to also refer to this barrier assessment maybe quickly and how it was done in their countries, to shed a little bit more light on this. Okay, so I think that there's no one at the moment who would like to comment on this. And with an eye on the clock, we're a little bit late, and I would like to give you a little bit of a short break at least. I hope you enjoyed your very short break, and I also, of course, hope that our next speaker, Enda Gallagher, had a time to get a quick glass of water or something. So yeah, welcome back to our second panel on where we'll look a little bit more into the transposition of Renewable Energy Directive in different member states. Mr. Hannoset already mentioned this morning the Irish case and the Irish support scheme for renewable energy communities. And I'm happy to have Enda Gallagher here from the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications in Ireland to tell us a little bit about what they are working on in terms of supporting the setup of renewable energy communities. And I'd like to give him the floor to give us a view and an insight into the Irish support scheme.
Thank you, Marie, and thank you to Johns and others for inviting us to attend and share the Irish experience. So I'll just move into share screen, and hopefully you can see that now.
Can you see your screen? Not yet in full screen mode.
Okay, I'm just moving to show, and I'll just try and get display settings. Hang on. I think that should be it.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so yes, the Irish support scheme and ultimately our support for renewable energy communities was very much designed with a view to the clean energy package and the various commitments to renewable energy communities there. I suppose the starting point for Ireland when we set about designing supports for renewable energy communities was the simple knowledge that there's just one renewable energy community in Ireland today. So obviously that points to a significant number of barriers that may have been in place to preclude communities from entering the electricity sector. So we wanted to address that shortcoming and to get to a stage where we had a very significant sector emerging, a community electricity sector. So in order to get from one to the other, we needed to reappraise our policy, and we needed to also put in place support. So essentially that's what we've set about doing. From the delivery of Ireland's Energy White Paper, the last one in 2015, we first started really considering the role of citizens and communities in our electricity system. And across a variety of public documents, national policy documents since then, those commitments have been underlined and reframed. And as well, I think I want to point to, on the other side of the coin, we had the citizens and communities themselves looking for change. And in Ireland, we had a variety of those sorts of groups and get-togethers, including a citizens' assembly and indeed a parliamentary committee on climate action, which looked at community energy and indeed the lack of it in Ireland. So we listened to all of those voices when we set about designing our, I suppose, our policy commitments and our support scheme. Just very briefly to touch on our programme for government, the current one in place today that our government is implementing. There are a number of mentions there pertaining to the importance of community energy, and that kind of national policy backdrop has strengthened our position dramatically when we've set about trying to deliver a change in this sector. As well, in terms of a national commitment, and the Climate Action Plan, which was published just 2 weeks ago, the 2021 edition of it, has included a target for the first time for community energy, community electricity generation, which is 500 megawatts by 2030. And considering where I mentioned we're starting from one project today, to get to 500 megawatts is a significant challenge, but as you will see, we're building a framework to support that delivery. And again, there are specific actions in the Climate Action Plan which are designed to support community electricity generation. And just to point out in relation to the clean energy package and commitments, we're bringing in, Ireland will have a statutory instrument which will basically transpose Articles 15 and 16 of IEMD, or the Markets Directive, and 21 and 22 of RED 2. So these are the provisions pertaining to citizens and communities, and we're bringing them in one standalone SI next month. So again, getting back to that slide I showed earlier, we need policy and we need support now to supplement the policy that I've discussed. So the support comes in the form of a typical support scheme, okay, for the development of renewable energy. These are in place all over the world. The difference, I think, with this one is that the last point I've highlighted, where there are very, very significant commitments to the delivery of the participation of communities in the scheme. And specifically, they are four. So the first two relate to the development of a separate community category within the scheme. So communities will, as Achille will be mentioned, be competing amongst themselves rather than competing against commercial players, which simply is not fair. And importantly, we're building an enabling framework of supports then to ensure that communities have projects to get into that separate community category. We can't just expect communities to go out there and deliver projects without support. And then for all projects, all renewable projects funded under the scheme, so this will include all the commercial projects, they all must have mandatory community benefit funds and citizen investment opportunities. So those were the four key pillars. I'll just mention very briefly, it took a lot of time to get those approved by DG Competition in terms of EU state aid. And I suppose the main things that we did in submitting our business case was to focus on the strong national policy, to focus on the evidence of need in Ireland. And also we pointed to evidence emerging from competitive auction frameworks where communities are clearly being excluded across Europe today. IRENA have done studies and others which have proved useful in building the case there. Just in terms of specifically, I suppose, what do these community these pillars actually translate into? essentially that first one, a separate community category, is a route to market. And everything that goes sort of towards supporting that market, our route to market, comes in the next slide, which is basically the enabling framework. So there's a range of elements to this. There's an information warehouse, there are financial supports, and then there are specialist services from trusted intermediaries who are like mentors to the projects, as well as trusted advisors who are providing specialist expertise to communities in Ireland to develop their own projects. Just in terms of the grant aid or the financing issues, I suppose finance is one of the key barriers, and I have one slide on barriers later. Finance is a key barrier for communities, obviously, to raise the kind of money needed. So there are two elements to the financing barrier as we see it. One is getting the projects moving from feasibility stage to construction stage. So there's a range of grant aid being provided to support communities at various stages of that project life cycle. And then when you get to the stage where you've got a viable project, you still need to raise equity. And that's something that we've got a lot of different options that we're looking at. Ireland doesn't have a community bank, and it doesn't have sort of local authorities who tend to support these sorts of things like in Europe. So we're looking at different options there. And just on the Community Benefit Fund, we're mandating that €2 per megawatt hour goes into a fund, and the department, the ministry, has published a range of good practice principles as to how that money can best be spent in the communities. And we've mandated that communities are at the heart of the decision-making process there through the establishment of a local committee. And then investment opportunities is one that I won't delay on here today. It's the most significant challenge. We want to ensure that all projects, commercial projects, offer locals the opportunity to invest. But to do that via mandate is proving very difficult in terms of regulatory and legal issues. So we're struggling with that one, and I'd be happy to discuss that later if people are interested. So just a pictorial representation of how this works in practice on the ground. The trusted intermediary is like the hand holder. That person will support communities at all steps of the journey. He or she will link the community in with the specialist advice and supports they need as they go. Everything from grid to financial advice and so on. And then in terms of the completing the jigsaw, I suppose you need your planning, you need your grid connection, you need your res offer. So that's where the community category comes in, and we've mentioned finance. And just to, I suppose, reframe it in one slide here, just to reframe what I've said, I suppose, in line with the RED 2 requirements for the barriers assessment. And I suppose essentially everything that we've done in the design of this scheme has been predicated on assessing the barriers and trying to dismantle them. So you can see there, we've basically taken the 4 key challenges, and we're making significant progress on all of them essentially, because even on the grid one, we've set up a separate community track within our formal grid process, again, to facilitate communities. And then just final slide is to point out that we've already had the first auction in this new support scheme last September. And the good news is that 7 of the projects that came through for support are now our community projects. So that one project that I mentioned at the start that is currently in existence today will become 8, hopefully by the end of next year. And we have another res auction lined up for next year. And again, we hope to get a range of communities through that. So look, that's just a very quick view, just on the time allowed. And I just thank you again for allowing Ireland to have the opportunity to discuss our situation with you. Thank you, Marie.
Well, thank you so much, Enda. This was really, really interesting, and I'm sure we'll have some questions in the chat later. If not, I will definitely have some for you. But let's go to our second country, to our second member state, where we'll have a shared presentation by Vjeran, Energy Manager of Kirk Island in Croatia, together with Sonja Schirmbeck, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung in Zagreb, And we will hear a little bit about transposition processes of EIMD and Virtu in Croatia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Good morning. Frankly say I didn't prepare a presentation because, as much I know, we have very short time. And the main reason is we just got a new law for the energy market a few weeks before. The main problem in Croatia is too strong fossil fuel lobby. And because of that, we have big delay in solarization in using of photovoltaics. If you look at the official data, Croatia is one of the worst countries in EU using solar energy, and maybe you can see that we are even now overloaded by the sun. So we had to fight first 5 years with the oil lobby, then 5 years with the coal lobby, and now 5 years with the gas lobby. And finally, we are allowed to make energy communities. We started with energy cooperatives 2012, and with regional energy agencies 2009, and clusters as well. But the problem is that our government officially didn't allow to make a big solarization. For example, the request for the documentation was very high. You had to prepare 82 papers if you want to put just few kilowatts on your own roof. And it's sometimes more than 500 pages of old document. So this bad story finally finished 2019, and now we are growing up with the number of deployment of photovoltaics and with numbers of installation. And we are going to prepare the first energy community. We have the meeting in December. And as I told you, we have a new law for the few weeks now, but we don't still have a sub-law act, who is very often in Croatia. Bureaucrats from the Ministry of Energy who are very close to the big companies and big fossil fuel lobby, they can put you a lot of troubles. The biggest trouble what we can see now is basically that you are allowed to make energy community around one trafo station, low voltage trafo station. And for example, I'm living in the small settlement of the 1,100 people, but we have free trafo station, and we should have free energy community. Totally stupid. So what we are doing now, we are, thanks to the German friends, we are making an assessment of this law, and we will complain probably to Brussels. The transposition of the RED II directive is not correct in the Croatian law system and the Croatian energy system as well. Last but not least, I am from island Krk. It is the northest and the biggest Croatian island. We are 408 square kilometers, 20,000 people in the winter, but 120,000 people in the summer, what is obviously a very big problem. And I'm leading project that we become first energy independent and first carbon neutral island Mediterranean until 2030. We started 2012, now we are building up to 100 megawatts of the renewable in the mix of 60 megawatts of the solar, 40 megawatts of the wind gas. And frankly said, that is not a problem. It's going well. What we are now working, exactly, we are working on the smart grid because we are very afraid of blackout, especially in the case of the summer when we have high consumption. And we negotiate with a few big energy companies from Europe about making microgrid pilot projects next year on my island. And parallel with that, with one Berlin startup, we are building even our own solution. So we can test free solution, free microgrids on the free energy communities, I hope next year. So much from me, and I would like to give floor to Sonja, because she have maybe more professional point of view, and I can come back if you need any more info.
Okay, thanks a lot, Vjeran, and Dobar dan also from my side. I'm Sonja Schirmbeck. I'm the director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung office here in Zagreb. Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is a German political foundation with roughly 105, I think, offices around the world, working on political dialogue. And so I'm not a law expert, but I can give you maybe a general picture on the political situation in Croatia and the question why this approach to give power to the people and to have an energy transition really that is really working bottom up is rather slow in Croatia, although we have very favorable condition, if you want. Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is working worldwide towards 4 strategic aims, and one of them is social ecological transformation. And that comprises, of course, also an energy transition. And as the term social ecological transformation says, is that we are promoting not only the ecological benefits, that is in that case a zero carbon energy sector, but also really highlighting the social benefits of such a transition, especially for Croatia. So true energy democracy. We just had a roundtable with Vjeran at the beginning of the week called Power to the People. Of course, we highlight that in the long run, the cost for each citizens will be much lower. And this is especially beneficial for a country such as Croatia with a very remote, if you want, hinterland and a lot of islands. And that also via a decentralization of the energy sector, we could finally bring jobs to those regions which are really struck by immigration. So yeah, to have a local value chain. And as I said, at the first glance, the conditions for a quick energy transition from below, driven by the people in Croatia, are actually pretty good. Vjeran mentioned that we have a lot of sun. I think this is known from Croatia. What is maybe less known is that Croatia has one of the highest shares of property owners in the EU. So people usually do not rent, they own property, and the wealthy families will often also have a second house at the coast. So you actually have very good condition for installing solar PV. Then the infrastructure is good. The education level is pretty high. And Vjeran said that there are some spoilers in the from the fossil fuel lobby, but they are not as strong as I would say in Poland or Czech Republic, where you really have this massive coal lobby, especially from the coal mining lobby. This is not so much the case in Croatia. Actually, the country is pretty much deindustrialized. And what we now see is the shipbuilding industry going down. So there are a lot of people who would actually be around and could be employed, for example, in a factory producing solar PV. And of course, we have money pouring in from the EU, from the recovery and resilient package, which could really be used to finance this transition. And yeah, what is happening? Do you see Croatians all over the place installing solar panels on their roof? Not really. I mean, except for Vjeran, very little is happening. And I was really wondering when I moved to Croatia in summer why this is the case. And so far, I identified 4 key reasons for that. And the one is, of course, the monopolist energy provider we have here, HEP. Which is simply not interested in a decentralization because they are afraid to lose control. They are also afraid to lose control over finance flows. And so we hear a lot of talk now about investing in a second block of a nuclear power plant instead, which already exists in the border region of Croatia and Slovenia on the Slovenian side. And I think if the taxonomy is changed in a way that nuclear power is considered green, then this will really, really hamper the process in Croatia further. And we have the situation that in Croatia, more than 50% of the domestic energy production is already from hydro. So this also is not exactly adding to the pressure that you have on other European member countries such as Poland. So this is obviously a big problem. Second problem is what everybody complains about is the real lack of capacity in public administration on all levels, attracting funding. I guess many of you have spent days and nights with EU proposals, and you know that it's not really trivial to do that. And well, if you sit in an administration somewhere in southern Dalmatia and you are there simply because you are the sister or the cousin of somebody who already was in the administration, and you are actually not trained for your job, and you are maybe not very interested even in your jobs because it doesn't give you benefits to apply for EU projects, then why should you do it? So there is sometimes really little interest, especially from that side, to attract more money or to do something innovative. The third reason is maybe the socialist path of the country, and you might think that this makes it easier to promote something like cooperatives. But the people who are still alive today, they witnessed more or less the end of the socialist era in Yugoslavia. So what they saw is firms not working, cooperatives not working, and so they have mixed feelings towards this area, towards this era, to say the least. And what you also have, if you look at concrete buildings, is that many apartments were given to people who got married under the socialist regime, and either they still live there or their relatives live there, and these people hardly or often have hardly any money to do maintenance of the building, let alone technical innovation. So that is also a problem. And then the fourth reason is, of course, the legislative framework. I mean, Vjeran was already mentioning all the red tape you have to do. There was an interview recently with somebody who said it took him 1 year to install solar panels, and of that 363 days was to get the permit, and 2 days was to install it. And so you need to be really, really enthusiastic if you do it. Vjeran also mentioned that we have the new law underway, which is currently debated in Parliament, and right now it doesn't look very promising. So I'm very, very grateful also to Jens Lowitzsch that he will do an assessment of the law together with Croatian experts, and they will have a policy paper on the assessment of the law published in 2 to 3 weeks, beginning of December. So you are all invited to join our conference on December 8th, where the policy paper will be presented and where we will then decide whether we will ask for a fact-finding missions from Brussels to assess the situation in Croatia. So what could help us really in this situation? Maybe also 4 points. One is really still awareness raising. So Vjeran just published a very good brochure in 10 steps how to put a solar panel on your roof, and he has been invited to communities all over the country to promote it. So the interest is definitely there. Second thing is, I think we could use the pressure from the main clients of Croatia, if you want. That is the tourists, of course. So I see that there's a lot of infrastructure built now for electric vehicles because the tourists demand it. And if we can show that there's also a demand for sustainable tourism, I hope that this will also help with the change. An exchange of communities is crucial. We had elections in May this year, which also in some communities promoted a new political power, Možemo, a green party platform, but also the Social Democrats are really showing interest in the issue of an energy transition from below now. So there is some political shifts we can use. And of course, last but not least, it's really the pressure from the EU. Not only a fact-finding mission, but also the fact that the payments from the recovery fund are really closely monitored, and there's a lot of conditionality that really helps with the situation in Croatia. So today is a sunny day, so let's be optimistic that we can catch up with Ireland maybe one day. So much from my side.
Thank you, Sonja. Thank you, Vjeran, for this insight into the Croatian ongoing process of transposition. If there are any questions to our speakers, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll have a short Q&A afterwards. We'll now hear from Dr. Andrea Borroni, who is working at the Jean Monnet professorship at University of Vanvitelli, and he's a lawyer by training as well, and he's gonna give us some insights into the Italian transposition of RED. We've heard already yesterday that some regions in Italy and Italy itself has quite an early adoption and some good steps made into the right direction. And we'll hear from Mr. Borroni about his view on this transposition that has happened in Italy. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mari. Indeed, here in Italy it's raining, but I'm optimistic too. And I hope not to be meteoropathic in discussing. But first of all, I want to thank for the invitation and to be part of the SCORE project. I go directly to the point. Yes, the title of my short presentation defines Italy as an early adopter, and this is true. But this statement needs some specification. Indeed, Italy has not issued a formal law at the moment, and for the adoption of the Renewable Energy Directive 2, it only started a pilot phase. So at the moment, we have a regulation that is contained in Article 42 bis of the so-called Mille Proroghe Decree, that was later converted into law in 2020, February 2020. And just to make the audience understand, Mille Proroghe stands for 1,000 extensions. So it provides the idea of the unsteady situation Italy is living in the adoption of the directive itself. So the experiment was overtly done for collecting data, information, experiences in order to better implement and adopt the directive themselves, and to be in line with the also Italian national plan for energy and climate. But the Article 42 bis I just quoted does not substitute the directive number 2001 of the 2018. So it creates for sure expectations, the wait and see effect, and some confusions. And this is the first trap. That is the second part of my short report. From a legal point of view, indeed, the main difficulty lies in the fact that energy community is defined as any kind of legal entity structure that can have duties and rights and having legal capacity. Of course, it's a very open definition, but on the other side, from a pure legalistic perspective, it creates some uncertainty. At the moment, the practical solution in Italy moved towards the two different kind of entities. The first one is the association with no commercial purpose. And the second one is the cooperative, or better, a specific kind of cooperative, the one in which the participation is shared, is divided into shares. So it's a shareholding cooperative. And it's taken from a consultation document issued by our the Italian Authority for Energy in 2020, the number 112, where in many alinea of the documents is said, or is referred to the member of the renewable energy community as shareholders. So there is some hints to have a solution, but not at the moment a specific detail and by law detail of what should be the specific form to establish a legally operating renewable energy community. Then again, we have some traps, some limits in the real adoption of the rationale of the directive, and it is a technical limit. The member of the community must have connection points on the low voltage network, as been said by the previous speaker, underpinning the same secondary substation. So to determine the amount of the shared electricity within the community, it matters only the production plants fed by renewable energy, located in the same perimeter and having each a total output of maximum 200 kilowatt. That is not so much if you think to really have an energy green transition. And furthermore, and this is the second limit, according to the black letter of the Mille Proroghe, these plants must be brand new and come into operation after March the 1st, 2020. And these limits of power and pre-use represent for sure an obstacle for the creation of an effective renewable energy market, as well as the fact that energy producer can also be entities not belonging to the community, and also the ones who have their core business in the energy sector, if the production plants they manage are owned by the same REC. So even if they don't belong to the REC, the energy injected in the grid impacts on the calculation of the share electrical energy. And the energy share within the community amounts to the minimum in each single time period between the energy injected or produced into the grid by the REC plants and the electrical energy actually taken by its member. But from the very beginning, we started the project some months ago, some step forward, at least in determination on the incentives announced by the Italian decree have been done. And so we have now incentive rate that is equal to 110 euro for each megawatts produced. Furthermore, some tariff components of the energy bill are returned to the member client, since these plants avoid some of the transmission costs within the grid, and that according to the ARERA, that is the Italian Authority for Energy, this remission amounts to 8 hours for megawatt hour for the renewable energy community on the shared electricity. And these are cumulative with tax deduction where available. When available. Furthermore, also the Italian agency on taxes, with the resolution 18E2 of March 12, 2021, so it's very recent, the Italian tax agency defines as fiscally irrelevant the incentives just described and the tariff components deriving from the avoided cost for the grid. Of course, instead, the sale of electricity injected in the net outside the grid has a fiscal impact. As last incentive, that I see that I'm almost finishing my time, we have an Italian peculiarity, that is the Eco Bonus 2020, also known as Super Bonus 110%. And this is a specific Italian measure, and that I'm not discussing here at the moment, allows the deduction of 110% of some cost, and among them the installation of a photovoltaic plant until the capacity of 200 kilowatt, also for the renewable energy community. So, and then concluding, the Iure Condendo, some of these issues are now on the top of the agenda of the legislative, and the proposed implementing decrees that are now pending at the Parliament indeed move towards 3 directives. The first one is that the self-consumption must be contained not to the second booth anymore, but to the primary. Second point is no power capacity should be limited. So the idea is to move forward from the 200 kilowatt that I just quoted. And finally, the third point of this decrease is that renewable energy communities could become the distributor of the electricity produced and should not be limited to the self-consumption. I should add, and I'm finished, that some of the guidelines on how draft establishing contracts, the established communities should be drafted in order to also erase some bureaucratic obstacles in the creation of communities. And maybe the funds given for specific researches and researchers within the Resilience and Recovery National Plan on the specific topic, green and innovation, and some of there, we know that directly deal with the renewable energy community sector, can answer to these open questions. So thank you for your time. I hope to be in my 10 minutes part of the day, and I'm free for any kind of question you can have. Thank you.
Yes, perfectly. 10 minutes on the point. So thank you for that and for this interesting intervention and a look at Italy. To conclude our panel, we have one more speaker from the Czech Republic, and that is Laura Otypkova from Frank Bold Lawyers. Frank Bold is a lawyer firm that has been in contact with us in the SCORE consortium for a long time now, and they have been very much actively involved in our Czech pilots and our Czech follower cities as well, and providing them also legal advice on the setup of renewable energy communities or energy communities in general. And Laura will give us an insight into the transposition and government requirements from the Czech Republican side.
Hello. So as Mari already said, I will be speaking about the Czech Republic and its transposition of energy communities into the law, or maybe rather the absence of transposition, and how can the subjects qualify for being in energy communities, even though that there's no transposition yet. I will start with the legal framework for energy communities. So in the European law, this is probably old news for all of you. I will just recapitulate. We have two directives that need to be transposed into national law. One is regulating the CECs, and the other one, the RECs, it is the Internal Market for Electricity Directive and the Directive on Promotion of the Use of Energy from Renewable Sources. These two variations of energy communities should have been already transposed into the national law. As you have heard from other speakers today, in many member states, this has already happened, but not in the Czech Republic. The situation is that currently the government is preparing a new Energy Act, which is a recodification of the whole energy system, not just energy communities. And energy communities should be a part of this big legislative package. But since this is a big legislative act, it means that it got some delay. So currently there is a delay in transposition of these two directives in the Czech Republic. And the current legislation does not know officially the term energy community or any variation of that, but it is possible for consumers to found associations or cooperatives which can function as energy communities, in fact, but they don't have all the benefits that the European legislation connects with the existence of an energy community. That means that the Czech law is not compliant with the EU legislation currently. What energy communities can do under the national legislation right now is invest in electricity generation or electricity energy storage. They can join their funds. They can cooperate in some legal form. they can share the electricity, but only provided they have a direct wire among themselves. And if they would like to use the public distribution network to share the electricity, they would have to sell the electricity to a trader and then buy it from them again and pay the distribution fee. So this is not very efficient for the communities to do. In most of the cases, such energy community could work in a block of apartments, for example, where they have the direct wire and they can share the electricity more easily. But I will get to this later. And also they can sell the surpluses of their electricity production. But here I also have to add a disclaimer that the current Czech tariffs for electricity are not very, how to say, not very accommodating for selling surpluses, because the market price of electricity is very low, and then the tariffs do not have any special tariffs for active consumers who only sell their surpluses. Yeah, but as I said, the current legislation does not know the term energy communities, so it doesn't even give rules for protection of consumers who are joining the energy communities. It does not give energy communities the proper rights to enter the energy markets without any discrimination or excessive administrative burdens. So it still is not as beneficiary for potential consumers to join in energy communities currently, but that is changing slowly. There are two practical solutions how to make an energy community work in the Czech Republic under the current legislation. The first one you can see in the first picture is a model of a block of apartments, and you can see that there are electricity meters. One is the primary or main joint electricity meter for the whole building. And then there are secondary electricity meters for each of the apartments, and also for a joint photovoltaic or other source of energy or electricity. It means that the consumers share the energy from the shared electricity production, and then they, from the point of view of the distribution network, they are considered as one customer with one joint connecting point. But inside they need to share the electricity and count how much each of them consumes, and then arrange the payments. Another way to make energy community work under the current legislation is a local distribution system. That's the second picture, and this solution is more complicated because a license is needed from the energy regulating office. And then, but if you have the license, you can operate your own distribution network, which doesn't have to be just one house, but it can be a whole neighborhood. It can be a whole municipality. Currently, it is used mostly for commercial or residential areas, or shopping centers, or industrial areas. And the advantage of this solution is that you don't have to pay for the distribution network fee, which makes it more efficient for savings. Here is a brief overview of what subjects can qualify for civic energy communities or communities for RES. I think you are familiar with these criteria, so this is just a reminder. Under the Czech legislation, it is possible to fulfill these criteria and become an energy community de facto. from European law point of view, but it does not play a role currently in the Czech legislation. So it is advised for emerging energy communities to fulfill the criteria right now, and when we get the legislation later, they will already qualify for the status of energy communities under European law. This is interesting and sort of problematic also from financial point of view, because currently there are lots of European funds available in the Czech Republic. It's the Modernization Fund, and then Just Transition Fund in the coal regions, and also the RRF, Recovery and Resilience Facility. And all of these funds can support energy communities. But since we do not have the legislative definition of these yet, the authorities are reluctant to provide money for energy community projects because they're not sure what the legislation will be, and it makes delays in the funding. But we argue that since there is delay in transposition of the European law, there should be direct effect of the directives, which means that it should be possible already for subjects that should be considered energy communities to be considered energy communities under these funding schemes. And it should not be problematic to provide them with money from e.g. Modernization Fund. We also already have a basic principles proposal for the new Energy Act. As I said, it's a big legislative package. And from what it says about energy communities, it suggests to establish a uniform definition for both types of energy communities with some modifications for renewable energy communities. It should be allowed for them to have any legal form or entity, some of the forms are advised. It is cooperatives and associations.
One more minute, Laura.
Sorry.
One more minute, please.
Yes, that's good. Yeah, but the proposal is not final. The government is preparing the final text of the law, so anything can change still. And there are two examples of projects already happening that fulfill the definition of energy communities, but you have already heard about them from other speakers from the Czech Republic, so I will just mention it very briefly. One is Prague, who helps people fund solar systems on their roofs and wants to join them into a big Prague energy community. And the other one is National Network of Local Action Groups, if I translate correctly, and they are founding a regional energy community as an association with the support of Frank Bolt lawyers as well. And that's all. This is my contact. I've been substituting here for my colleague Anna Francová, so here's her contact information as well if you want to ask any questions later.
Thank you, Laura. Really interesting. Thanks for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, thanks to all four of our panelists. We have a few questions, not too many, but some in the chat, and I would like to address them now. We have one from Kai Lipsius from Essen. I guess it's dedicated to Laura because she was the last speaker. What does openness in membership mean?
Okay, it refers to the slide where there were legal conditions for energy communities. So it does not mean that anyone has to be accepted, but the criteria have to be non-discriminatory. And what we saw in the Czech law as a problem is that the openness also means that you can leave at any time, or you can change your electricity supplier at any time because you are protected as a consumer. And for example, the legal form of association of apartment owners, which is a specific legal form in the Czech Republic, is not open for anyone from the outside to enter, and also it is not open for anyone to leave because membership in this association is connected with ownership of the apartment. So this criteria can be problematic, for example, in these cases, but it does not mean that anyone can join, of course.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me know if this answered your question or if you have a follow-up. I had a question to Enda because he said that they provide or the scheme provides capacity building for communities. So I was wondering, do you also provide capacity building for municipalities? Because in Red 2, they are also specifically mentioned as potential members in renewable energy communities. And our experience is that their role is sometimes limited to more old-fashioned parts of cooperatives, or so how do you provide support? Because also Sonja mentioned that, of course, Croatian municipalities first have to embrace this new role as pacemakers of RECs.
Yes, so when we transpose next month, there will be a provision in there for our energy agency, which is the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, to fulfill that role with respect to local authorities and municipalities. Already we have appointed the energy agency as the implementation body for what we call RAISE communities, so for the communities elements of this scheme. So they are already developing this framework of specialist expertise, information sharing, and so on. And for instance, last month, they published the first suite of information documents for different sort of how-to guides on grid connection planning, how to develop a solar community project, and so on. So they will also be charged with delivering on the capacity building in the local authority sector. And then separately, just again, I suppose, to try and join up the way government operates from both a national to a local level, we've invited 2 members from the local government sector to sit on our steering board for this RAISE community scheme. And that steering board is made up essentially of state players half, and half are community advocates themselves. So that group of 16 people is now trying to, I suppose, advise government on how best to develop the policy further, and local government, municipalities and so on is seen as a very important partner in that.
Of course, thank you for this answer. I saw that we had a question to Sonja as well. She already partly answered it in the chat regarding public charging, which is free in Croatia. Is there anything you would like to add in this regard, maybe for all participants who didn't follow the chat?
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, Vjeran, of course. Yeah, you've now.
Well,
it's very wild developing of the market. For example, our main electricity company and our main telecommunication company made some chargers, and they didn't know how to ask people to pay for the charging. It was a lack of the IT infrastructure, and somehow still on the most of the charging station in Croatia you can charge your electricity car. But now some of them you need to pay, and the price is extremely high and very irregular high, or if it's still free, the power what you can get is very low. So we had a conference 2 weeks before about putting all the charging systems in Croatia over the one paying methods with a more or less similar price, and to give people from European Union a chance to have the roaming. If you have already some kind of the paying method, you can pay it even in Croatia. So it is work in progress. And the main answer, as I told already, is that we had a few suppliers of the electric charging from the big companies, and they didn't care about money. They had enough money just to put it like a PR project.
Thank you, Vjeran. Yeah, Sonja?
Yeah, maybe I just add on that, because I arrived here with my electric car from Berlin, and I was actually, first of all, to put a positive note, surprised to see that you can really get across the country, or most parts of the country without ever having a problem. And it's true that still most of it is free, but as I said, there will be probably a pricing system installed. Of course, this has also been set as an incentive for people from Croatia to really buy electric vehicles. What I can see that it created a big incentive, especially for taxi drivers, and so a lot of these charging stations are then also blocked with taxi drivers who use this as a free method to refuel their car. And I think that on partly it's also good if there is a pricing system in place, if it is with acceptable costs. But as I also mentioned in the chat, it's very, very hard to find out. Of course, I tried to Google it, what the major sources of energy that are provided at these charging stations really is. And yeah, telecom or the monopolist energy provider they have not such a big interest in declaring that openly what energy sources they really use. So yeah, it's a good side and a bad side. As I said, it could be better, but it could also be worse.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our speakers for this really interesting panel. I think we've learned a lot, and hopefully we'll be able to follow the good practices that have been established in some of the member states, such as Ireland. But we've heard, I think, also from Italy, quite interesting incentives that are being put in place, and hopefully the timeline allows for also very stable regulation to be put in place soon, and hopefully all member states will be able to benefit from the budget of the Recovery and Resilience Fund. So hopefully there's room for improvement in all member states for this then, for the transposition of the regulation. Okay, so Mr. Lowitzsch, thank you. Thanks again for being here. Again, everyone, for our last roundtable discussion on science, innovation, and inclusion in the energy transition. We have 5 distinguished speakers with us. I'm very happy to introduce again Dr. Patrizia Lombardi, who we had yesterday, Vice Rector of the Politecnico in Torino, and also, of course, a professor and part of the SCORE partnership. Then we have Mr. Thomas Pellerin-Carlin, the director of the Jacques Delors Energy Center, which is a European think tank on energy matters. And he focuses his work on observing the energy union of the EU and so the social justice dimension of the energy transition. And we're very happy to be discussing with you today as well. We also have with us Dr. Lucia Ruggeri, who is the legal advisor to ENCIEL, which is an inter-university consortium between Italian universities on energy matters and energy transition. And she's a professor at Camarino University as well on civil law. And of course, last but not least, we have Radostina Primova with us from the Center of Study of Democracy from Sofia, and she is a senior policy advisor on energy policy and international politics. And this roundtable will be moderated by Professor Lowitzsch. He is also, of course, one of the guests, and he will be moderating this workshop. He will be moderating this roundtable, and then he will also be closing the debate and the conference afterwards. So I'm giving the floor and the word to Professor Lowitzsch, and thank you for everything.
Thank you very much, Marie. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, there was a feedback, but now you should hear me loud and clear. So welcome to this roundtable, which is the last part of the final conference of our SCORE project. As Marie already mentioned, this roundtable discussion as a topic, science, innovation, and inclusion in the energy transition. And the idea of it is that our distinguished speakers will have 3 minutes each to briefly say what is the context of their work to energy communities, prosumership, and to the score topic. And after this 3-minute take on the link of their work to this, I will ask 4 questions to the 4 invited guests. And after each of them who is asked the question had a first take on it, the others will comment on that, and I will be moderating this round. So I would like to first introduce or give the floor to Patrizia Lombardi, Vice Rector of the Politecnico, to say in a few words where her work is connected to the topic of the conference. Patrizia, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Jens, and good morning again to all participants. Well, I am part of the SCORE project since the beginning, but I would like here to emphasize my role as president of the Italian Network of Universities for Sustainable Development, which is a network which has been developed since 2015 with the aim of promoting Agenda 2030 and sustaining and supporting the transition toward the more sustainable world. It involves 80 universities, about 800 delegates from different disciplines, and working around 7 different working groups, including energy, mobility, climate change, food, Western resources, education, and social justice and inclusion. The aim is to share good practices and to share experiences, because we believe that this transition has to be done together, and universities play a crucial role in supporting the local communities in this transition. So the opportunity in the Italian context to have this important input of financial support from the European Commission is crucial at this moment, that universities provide the opportunity ecosystem of innovation for allowing this transition. And the SCORE project, I believe, play an important role in highlighting how is possible through partnership and through collaboration with the local stakeholder to give appropriate implementation of a concept like the prosumer and the energy community, which has in the central role the sharing and the partnership. These 2 keywords are really at the core as well of the network of this Italian network of universities, which I believe can help as well in the future of the implementation of this result. I think my 3 minutes are gone.
Thank you very much, Patrizia, for this short introduction. And now I would like to ask Thomas Pellerin-Carlin, a director of the Jacques Delors Energy Center, to briefly state where his work is connected to the conference topic. Thomas, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Jens. My name is Thomas Pellerin-Carlin. I work for the Jacques Delors Institute. I'm joining you from Paris. My job is to be a think tanker. So essentially, my task is to act as a bridge between academia, citizens, and policymakers. So my aim is to provide to national and European policymakers policy recommendations that are grounded in scientific evidence and that are likely to be supported by a wide majority of the citizens. One project on which we are currently working is a Horizon 2020 project called Energy Prospects that tackles the issue of energy citizenship. energy citizenship is one of those, catchy buzzwords that have been used increasingly, especially at the EU level, but that remains poorly defined. Sometimes you hear the Commission talking about citizens and energy citizens, and what they really mean is just active consumer. And so in the project, we try to understand what are currently the definitions of energy citizenship that are being used by policymakers, to what extent they describe a reality, and to what extent they describe a political aspiration that policymakers might have. In order to better understand what is happening in terms of energy citizenship in the ground in Europe, we're going to have a citizen survey with more than 10,000 citizens. Building on that, we're going to analyze, or rather do a database of 500 energy citizenship cases and try to grasp the diversity of those situations from the local energy communities that we may be aware of, from the prosumers, but also from new movements that we've seen, such as the Citizen Convention on Climate Change that we've seen in Ireland, in France, or in Germany recently. And building on that, we're going to do 40 in-depth case studies that will try to understand the diversity of the situation of what energy citizenship really means in real life. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm putting in the chat for everybody some more information on the project if you want to get in touch with us later on. Thank you, Jens.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Our next invited guest is Professor Lucia Ruggeri. She is legal advisor to the Inter-University Consortium as ENSEAL, as I already mentioned. Maybe, Lucia, you could above all say a few words about ENSEAL and then the link to the conference topic, because I'm not sure if all the participants are familiar with what ENSEAL actually is. Thank you, Lucia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much to SCORE, to all the organizer. And I would like to define the importance of the consortium. Consortium ENSEAL is composed by 25 universities, supported by Italian government. ENSEAL is a consortium, no-profit research organization operating in the field of energy, electrical system, electrical installation. Camerino University is a partner of the consortium. The unit in Camerino University is focused on consumer law, energy law. With ENSEAL, at this moment, we are working together in a project granted by University of Camerino, enabling consumer to become prosumer. And the project is composed by 46 researchers from 15 nationalities, different nationalities. We work with the municipalities in Italy, thanks to the support of Lydia Lenuta Balan. We work also with the municipalities in Romania. So is a project with the theoretical aspect, but also with the practical experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lucia, for this short introduction. Now I would like to give the floor to Radostina Primova, who is also a member of the SCORE Consortium on behalf of the Center for the Study of Democracy in Sofia. And again, Radostina, please, would you contextualize your work? Thank you.
Many thanks, Jens, and it's a great pleasure to be here live in Torino and at the Energy Center despite these difficult COVID times, and also to be able to present CSD. So the Center for the Study of Democracy, for those of you who have not heard, is a European public policy think tank, but also one of the first think tanks in Bulgaria, established in 1989. And in particular, we combine research excellence with advocacy in piloting social innovation and institutional reforms in Bulgaria. And we have an expanding energy and climate division where as particular topics we are looking, in particular we have regional experience in Southeast Europe and Central and Eastern Europe in developing modeling assessments for energy transition, decarbonization, and recently have been developing also policy recommendation and advocacy on democratization and decentralization, because this is a missing aspect. More recently, we have been working a lot on the issue of green recovery pathways, as together with other European partners and Klimact, we have developed long-term decarbonization scenarios for Bulgaria in order to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And also an assessment, we have piloted comparative methodology, like a set of guidelines on assessing the so-called territorial just transition plans based on criteria like inclusiveness, decarbonization ambition, and green economic also diversification. We have basically, this is a key aspect and a key project we're working on how to enable a just transition, how to make sure that member state authorities identify vulnerable consumers and include them actively also in strategic documents, also in the just transition process, as we have found also a lot of deficits in the stakeholder consultation process. And we are making sure that this kind of guidelines address these questions of inclusivity, equity, also that they put a focus on this kind of also small scale citizen-led projects and not only on large infrastructural project. It has been the case now, and I'm very happy to join the discussion today.
Thank you very much, Radostina. Just a few words about the format of this roundtable discussion. So I have prepared a lead question to one for each of the participants, and after we'll start with the first question to Patrizia Lombardi, and then the other panelists will comment on her response, and then we'll proceed to the second question to Thomas, then to Lucia and to Radostina, and so on and so forth. So my first question to Patrizia is, in your point of view, how can research institutions respond to the challenges of the digital and energy twin transition?
Well, thank you very much, Jens, for this question, which allow me to explain a little bit better what the Italian university academic system is doing in answering and meeting the challenge of this twin transition, which I believe is just one transition, and I would like to include also the social one together with the digital and the ecological one. Universities, as I said at the beginning, play a major role, I think crucial for the achievement of the Agenda 2030, and particularly the revolution for the Italian system in meeting the target. And they are working considering there are four missions: the education, the research, and innovation, including also the social awareness. In the education, they have started a number of revision relating to their approaches, including the highlighting new courses that are meeting and more focusing on the subject of obviously focused educational approaches, which have started also to be renovated in terms of the way they are making this education. I mean, the fact that using inclusive and challenge-based approaches, we believe that students can enrich their education and better meet also the social effect in their result. In addition, most technical university like Politecnico has started new courses that are more transdisciplinary, where human science are together with more hard and technical science together in highlighting this different challenge posed by the Agenda 2030, and therefore are able to provide the contextualization for the new generation of students approaching this different challenge. These are just examples, but clearly universities are also connected with business sector, and together provide the upskilling and reskilling which are required for all the people that are working in different sectors, and also creating new green jobs for the future. In the research, they are organizing in partnership with other university and business sectors and industrial partner, those innovation ecosystems, territorial innovation ecosystem with hub and spokes model that can better support the transition, both the in environmental viewpoint, but also social and digital one. And this has been also an important aspect that from the minister viewpoint has been really supported, because because it's important to structure this kind of organization in order to be more supportive. And I close with the third mission, where the Italian network of universities are more connected, which is relating to all those services and sharing of knowledge that is possible to be done only in connection with the different territorial stakeholders. From the score perspective, an important aspect that I would like to highlight is the collaboration that we have started with the GSE, which is Gestore Servizi Energetici, which is the company that has been identified by the state to achieve this environmental sustainability, and in connection with them, building the energy communities across the nation. This agreement, which have supported and which is active since 2019, I think is one of an important step for supporting the implementation as well of our collaboration. And I conclude also with another achievement, that is the identification of exactly the indicators and the way we are able to build the dashboard for collecting all the emissions in order to better standardize the reporting and the transition toward a carbon neutral campus. These are just a little example of what is ongoing in our research institution systems, and I believe that may be an interesting step for connecting with the others.
Thank you, indeed. But it's so what you're, if I recall correctly, this last achievement is also very important in the context of the Glasgow COP meeting, because it introduces actually climate accounting and the rules for climate accounting for the first time. What I would like to ask, and this is where I give the floor to the other participants, is of course you are in a university and university students are of age. So what is with even younger students? So students that go to elementary school, to high schools. So those that are not that are minors still. But, and this is an important aspect here with regard to intergenerational justice. And this is something that I'm sure Thomas will have something to say about. So do we also respect the young generation, which will actually have to carry the burden in the future of the decisions that we take now? And this, as I just pointed out, does not only regard students that go to university, but actually already teenagers or actually children who are concerned and who we see taking the streets. So I think we'll just keep the order for the moment. Of course, anybody may take the floor, but Thomas, would you like to continue?
So would you like me to react on that specifically, this issue of the youth? Yeah, okay. First, I think, I'm really distressed when I hear the idea that we need to act now for future generations, because the problem is happening now. I mean, the floodings that happened in Germany, in Belgium, happened the last summer. So I think when people back in the 70s were saying that they should act for future generation, they were right. But I am this generation that was the future generation back in the 70s. So yeah, I mean, the teenagers that died in Belgium because of the flooding this year already are people that literally died because of the flooding that was intensified because of climate change. So the problem is here and now. I think we have a challenge of education, and we tend to over-focus on what schools can do. Schools are just one segment of education. What we need is a drastic change in our society. Hoping that by educating children who can change society is really a long shot. We can hope that children will educate their parents. That does work from time to time. We can hope that once they grow up, they can change the world, like in 2060, when it's going to be too late. But what we need is a massive educational effort all across society, all across age groups. Schools are definitely one area where policymakers can act quite quickly. But it should be a whole of generation approach, and we should not do that for future generations. We should do that for our generation today.
Thank you. Lucia, any comments from your side?
In my opinion, we have in the young people really the importance of our past education. In my vision, I'm a mother, and in my vision, we have young people, really involved in climate change, really aware about the importance of, for example, COP26, and maybe university needs to cooperate, needs to create bridge with school, primary school, high school, to educate together with the professor, with the teachers. And maybe we have to find some kind of a laboratory in which we can involve family, because we need to create a good environment for education, not contradictory, not antinomy. And the most important thing is the behavior of adults. So, for a university, for Italian university, in my opinion, we have to use the third mission to spread our ideas, and the SCORE project, in my opinion, is a good example of this good behavior in research and in science.
Go ahead,
Sorry,
please.
I would like to just reply to this by saying that, in fact, we have a strong connection with all the school and a number of students. There are some experiences, not only here in our university, but also in other universities in Italy, where students of particular courses goes to schools in a peer-to-peer approach related to climate change, particularly when Friday for Future strikes started to be very often available in our squares, urban square. We started to use this kind of approach for educating as well young students and be proactive and also better understand what they were doing, because we have been all child and we understand that sometimes the strike was also an opportunity to jump out from, but there is really a commitment and a relation strong willing to make this connection and this renovation in all the educational system, because I agree that we have to start since the beginning to educate towards sustainable development in our behavior, in our mindset, and this is happening. That's my reaction. I mentioned before the revision of the educational approach in universities and also in connection with business and industrial sectors, but I didn't mention schools. So thank you very much for highlighting this, because it is happening. Thank you.
That was Tina. Maybe you also would like to react, and maybe I'll already add a question here. What about those that don't have a voice? If we think of people who are suffering from energy poverty, I know that CSD does a lot of research on energy poverty, and that actually the Central Eastern European countries and Southeastern European countries are very much affected by energy poverty. So do we reach these? Is not only the young, but also those that are not organized, that may be for various reasons not taking the floor?
Yes, I think, Jens, you also addressed a very important question about the distributional justice and how basically we distribute also the costs and the benefits of the transition, and how it is perceived also by different stakeholder groups, and particularly in countries where we have energy poor. But I would like to include first a key comment here also, why we have such sometimes a backlash in Central and Eastern European countries towards the energy transition, and say that universities, research institutes, and also think tanks have a very important role of fostering a fact-based and evidence-based dialogue on this question, because what we observe right now in Central and Eastern Europe is also a dissemination of disinformation narratives about the European Green Deal, about the energy transition, and some of them include that the European Green Deal is responsible for the increasing energy prices, for the energy transition, which is causing quite severe backlash among also local populations that are relying on social media or on traditional media. On the other hand, we exactly need this kind of bridge building and facts-based analysis, dispelling these myths and showing also the vast opportunities that we have with the green transformation process. That this is the one which is which has the capacity to foster a just transition, in particularly with renewable energy communities, and to make consumers also be prosumers and active participants. In terms of reaching out to these vulnerable groups, that's a very important point, because first of all, this type of local authorities or local councillors, they have a major task here to play, because they need to identify the right channels, how to reach them, because these groups sometimes are difficult to reach. They don't have the resources or the knowledge to be involved in consultations or in mainstream debates. So depending on the local constituencies, you have to find the right channel. And we have also an interesting example from one of our co-regions in Marica East in Bulgaria. Like there was this regional development agency in Stara Zagora that used one of the radios basically that she knew it's the most where most people are listening to it, and in order to initiate some dialogues and discussion and starting to inform the public why we need this green transformation process and what it would entail also for local communities. So first of all, we need facilitators or multipliers like this the so-called climate ambassadors at local level that facilitate the dialogue and break it down to things that are important for for this type of groups, like reducing energy prices, also possibilities, providing information how exactly they could get involved in this process. And last but not least, I think also universities and also research institutes play a key role in providing technical know-how, and particularly in the context of just transition plans. There is a lot of emphasis on cooperation with universities because many times many of these core regions in Central and Eastern Europe lack this technical know-how, for example, in terms of socio-economic assessment on the job potential, which are the areas which provide possibilities for green innovation and jump-starting this type of renewable energy cooperatives. And in particular, universities could fill in this gap in providing this socio-economic analysis and identify a technological roadmap, basically, how we get there.
Thank you very much, Radostina. Leading over to the next question, I would like to comment on this also from the point of view of the SCORE project. Actually, in our pilots, we have two pilots, one ex-pilot and one current pilot, which I think very much demonstrate the difficulty of the challenge that we just discussed. The first one was our pilot project in Słupsk in Poland, where actually one part of the project involved a homeless shelter. And the idea of the project was that IKEA donated a 10 kilowatt peak photovoltaic installation for this homeless shelter. And SCORE was facilitating the business model to facilitate that the residents, so the people who live in the shelter, would acquire a share in the photovoltaic installation with a matching contribution of our project sponsors. And sadly, this project was aborted at the moment when it was actually almost concluded. So the photovoltaic installation was installed, the donation was done, the city supported the project, and then municipal elections came. And after the election, the new mayor had only a very thin majority in the city council. And of course, this project was somewhat experimental because the idea that homeless would become actually co-owners seemed to be something really strange to them. And in the end, they withdraw their support to the project because it was disputed by the opposition, and the political climate in Poland was so, if I may say, poisoned at some point. But what is also important to highlight here is a structural problem that we faced, and that was that actually the people who receive means-tested transfers actually have a disincentive to participate in renewable energy communities. Why? Because usually a prerequisite to receive these means-tested transfers is that you are poor. So first you have to be somebody who doesn't own anything, who doesn't have income. And once you become co-owner, this co-ownership or the returns of this co-ownership would be set off against your social transfers. So basically, by becoming a co-owner in these projects, you would risk to set this off and to lose what you receive from the energy community, because you would lose proportionally the part of the social transfer. And interestingly, and this is why I'm saying this is would introduce my question to Thomas, the French legislator, to my big surprise, when transposing RED II, has taken a very innovative approach in qualifying social housing projects by law as potential renewable energy communities. And of course, only provided that these housing projects will have renewable energy installations. And the legislator actually went even further by stipulating that the residents of such social housing projects by default would be members of such a renewable energy community. So it's an opt-out model, which means that, like an organ donation, everybody is a donator unless you say, I don't want to. So by this law, in theory, you would create thousands of participants in renewable energy communities in these social housing projects, of course, again, with the possibility to opt out. And I would like to ask Thomas, with regard to his Horizon project on energy citizenship, and with regard to this French context, whether how you assess the chances that inclusiveness in a just transition can actually achieved. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. I think to start, I want to come back on the term twin transition that was used. The reason why I want to do that is because I think it's a very misleading term. I personally never use it unless to criticize it. What we don't have a twin transition. We have two distinct, interrelated but distinct transitions: the digital one and the energy one. They happen to be happening at the same time in the same continent, in our case, Europe. Why are they different? The digital transition is mostly driven by technology developments and by private initiatives that develop new usage of those technologies. The policy here is always reactive, always lagging behind economic changes. And the jobs that are destroyed by this digital transition don't create massive political movements. There is not a massive political movement of people who sell books, who have lost their job as a result of Amazon becoming the greatest book provider all over Europe. When we look at the energy transition, it's a very different one. It's mostly driven by policies, by regulation, by public subsidies. Policy here is proactive. And so that means the jobs that are destroyed are proactively destroyed by policy. And therefore, there is a very legitimate demand from those people to get a form of compensation. And if they don't get a form of compensation, which can be financial, but which can also be emotional and psychological and political, you do have political movements, and we saw them. So those are two massively different transitions. And I think we, as researchers, should not create more confusion by just spreading European Commission propaganda of presenting that as a twin transition. They do that for political reasons that I can detail if you want, but they don't describe reality. They just have political message that is useful to achieve their political meaning. So the energy transition, I think it will be socially fair or it will not happen, or at least not happen in a democracy. If we zoom out and we look at what are the three historical options that we have, we can choose not to do the transition and go for climate chaos. That's something we can choose to do. To some extent, that's something that globally we've chosen to do implicitly by not acting or acting insufficiently. The second option is to do the transition in a way that would be anti-democratic, a dictatorial way. Let's call that the China way, if you want, of doing the transition. And the third option, which is the one that we tend to favor as European citizens, is to do a transition in a democratic and socially fair manner. That's at least what the European Green Deal claims it's willing to do. So what can we as researchers contribute in that debate? How can we say, what can we say about the possible social impacts of climate policies? And I want to take three brief examples: carbon pricing, energy poverty, and the issue of regions and workers. On carbon pricing, we have decades of political science analysis that show that people do not, by people I mean citizens, do not believe that carbon pricing is good for the environment. They just don't believe that. So the only way to ensure some kind of political support for carbon pricing is to say, we're going to recycle 100% of the revenues of carbon pricing to finance projects that are green and that are socially fair. That's a message that we as the research community should always hammer to policymakers, because that is not what they're doing. Most of them are adopting carbon pricing and use the revenue to finance the general budget, which is the recipe for disaster, or at least for political disaster. So yeah, second thing, energy poverty. The main slogan of the European Commission that has been taken by other national governments is the slogan of "Leave no one behind." We've heard that all the time. I always have a problem with this slogan because of what it entails implicitly. Implicitly, it entails that the fossil fuel system left no one behind. But that's not the case. The fossil fuel system left tens of millions of Europeans behind. All the people in Bulgaria or in France that are suffering from energy poverty, all of them are, let's say, the losers of the inefficient use of fossil fuels. So the political objective of a socially fair transition is not only to make the transition fair, but to make the new energy system fairer, more inclusive than the inefficient system based on the inefficient use of fossil fuels. So as experts here, we have two duties. One is obviously about policies, which kind of policies can actually change that. And here I have in mind, for instance, the inclusion of mandatory energy performance standards for in buildings, so to oblige homeowners to renovate the buildings, especially when they are renting the buildings to people. We have a duty also in terms of saying that social housing is definitely the lowest hanging fruit in terms of deep building renovation. And so we should have all social housing in Europe becoming net energy contributors as buildings in the forthcoming future. That's something that is easy to do for social housing. Then I think we also have a second duty, which is to ask ourselves, what are the words that we're using? I'm all in favor of using jargon when we are between us as researchers, and definitely makes sense to use energy poverty because we all know what it means, what is the definition, the 4 criteria as developed by the Energy Poverty Observatory, etc., etc. But when I'm talking to a member of the parliament in France or in Brussels, when I'm talking to a minister, if I say energy poverty, does it ring a bell? Maybe, maybe not. So what I'm doing personally, but that's my own personal choice, I'm saying we have a situation where we have families who suffer from cold at home in the winter. And when we talk about energy poverty in that way, I mean, I'm just saying something else, when I'm saying 30 million people are suffering from energy poverty, and I'm saying that 30 million Europeans who suffer from cold at home in the winter, I'm essentially saying the same thing. But obviously you have a level of emotion that the word family or suffering bring that a jargon term like energy poverty does not bring. So I think we should wonder what are the words that we're using, and obviously tailor that to the audience, especially when we're talking to policymakers. And finally, the last word on regions and workers. The transition is so radical, such a radical change, that it will change the job of millions, and it may also change drastically the economic fate of European regions. I'm not sure there will be, a steelmaking industry in Lorraine or in Westphalia in 30 years. That would be the end of 150 years of steelmaking industrial history in those two regions that have been at the heart of the second industrial revolution in Europe. What is the best way to make such a difficult transition in a socially fair manner is to plan ahead. And here we have a duty as researchers to say to policymakers, don't dig your hand in the sand, plan ahead. What's your plan? What's the date for implementing what we call sunset policies? So the decline of coal production, the decline of coal-based steel making in a given region. And at the same time that we have those sunset policies, help policymakers develop what we call sunrise policies. So policies that will nurture the economic system in that particular region, create jobs, and ideally, in the ideal world, jobs that would be taken by the people who lose their job in the dying industry. And so here we need to go very granular. What is the skills of those people? Where are they situated geographically? And when will their job end? And hopefully, as much as is possible, we try to match all of that together to ensure a transition that is as socially fair as one can hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosina, would you like to comment immediately, especially on the remarks on energy poverty?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, basically, I think that energy poverty is something that member states currently, the Bulgarian government, for example, is developing a special reform on energy poverty, like energy poverty strategy as part of the recovery and resilience plan. However, I think this is very much related to the whole basically energy structure in the country, or the ownership. And here I think we need a kind of a more bottom-up approach in providing an enabling framework for this type of small project, energy communities, citizens. And that's where we should start with. We should start, unfortunately, in many countries, there is an approach like, okay, I give you here energy subsidy, and basically that's the way how you solve the poverty measure. But there should be a bit of a more systematic approach looking to the structural inequality problem, and in particularly provide more targeted support schemes that integrate vulnerable consumers early on in the process. Because as we have seen, which is the case with many European funding schemes, they focus a lot on larger projects, threshold projects, and leave the member state as gatekeepers to take care of this. But that is not always appropriately operationalized at national level, because as someone mentioned, energy policy, this type of energy poverty policies are not always, or measures are not always aligned with social policies at national level. I think here decentralized energy generation has a huge potential to play. In many countries, for example, in Bulgaria, there is a lot of unutilized potential for decentralized PV-based generation, which is 5.4 terawatt hour per year, and which is 1/7 of the currently energy consumption, which is a low-hanging fruit that is not utilized because we don't have the regulatory framework is not implemented yet. There are a lot of bottlenecks like discriminatory grid access for this kind of small actors. Also, we have this kind of opposite circle, that the ones that are implementing prosumer measures are the one that can afford it, that are well off and can afford it. Because all these other, for example, energy refurbishment, installing a heat pump requires initial capitals that basically ordinary citizens are struggling to get. So this type of programs should be part of all these operational programs, National Recovery Plan, and others that should provide a direct subsidy or grants, especially micro grants, for a project like this that facilitates from the very early this initial capital costs for also for energy poor households.
But let me be a bit provocative here in a comment. So you mentioned energy subsidies, and actually you could argue that they make the recipient dependent on these subsidies instead of making them autonomous. So I would argue that actually making them co-owners and yes, allowing them to form assets would be the way out, because that would provide them with a second source of income other than labor, other than work, which they may lose because they're in a structural difficult region. So that's really at the core of the problem as I see it. And the question now, when you mention the subsidies, and we see the post-COVID recovery, or post-COVID, or the still COVID recovery measures and limited illiquidity, but I don't see these funds go to small projects. Actually, seems to be a mismatch, because if you're a donor or if you're an agency that administers these funds, then you want large projects, because it's better to spend 10 times 10 million than 100 times 1 million, because it's 10 times the work to supervise these projects. So structurally, large projects are given priority, whereas small projects are losing out. And that's again, if you now think about energy poor, the projects will be really small, as the example that I made in Swoops, where it's only a 10 kilowatt peak installation on a homeless shelter. So how do we get out of this dilemma, which is connected to the welfare dilemma that I mentioned? And that would then, of course, also lead to my, actually the third, and we'll skip the fourth question. The third question, what are actually business opportunities for the market actors to cooperate with these small projects, with these vulnerable groups, in order to see, is there a future for such corporations, or will these worlds always be kept apart?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost, we have to create a level playing field for these small actors, which is actually not in the case in many countries. Like in countries like Bulgaria, unfortunately, we still observe a predominance of this oligopolistic energy model. And let's give an example. The current recovery plan, for example, in terms of the major, there is a very large scale renewable energy public tender for construction of 1.7 gigawatt of renewable energy. However, there is a mandatory requirement to provide 25% of storage of the electricity, which means that small and medium enterprises cannot basically compete on an equal basis. So that means that this huge amount of financial resources will go to a small ratio of companies, and also, yeah, this is the case. We have another large-scale project, which is the installation of 1 gigawatt gas plant that in the future will transport hydrogen. That is exactly example that this is not a level playing field, because and it takes away important resources that could be provided for the type of projects that you just highlighted. I think one possibility is out of it is to jumpstart renewable energy investments, and first to pilot them at small municipal level. Like right now we have different examples with our pilots in SCORE, and then to take up the successful pilots and out of them to include them into a nationwide program or a plan for jumpstarting this kind of small-scale investments. And yeah, you rightly pointed out that basically consumers, they need to be co-owners as well in this scheme. And yeah, this could start at small scale and then turn out into also public-private partnerships, depending on the particular model in the particular municipality. Yeah, but for me, like also this is also related to the availability of the right financial tools that are not always existing, because in many cases, like in Bulgaria, we don't have, for example, targeted credit, like credit facilities for this, or specialized bank products for microcredits. For example, if you want to install a renewable energy community or a small, basically you need to, the conditions are not very favorable. You need to have a consumer credit and not micro grant, because they don't, the banks don't recognize this as an investment project, but rather as another type of project. And this basically, so we need more of these tailored financial mechanisms for this type of actors in particular, so that they have access indeed to this type of funding.
Thank you. Lucia, maybe you would like to take the floor, especially because in Italy there are so many funds available now. There's almost unlimited liquidity, and especially from the point of view of practitioners like you know, NCL from the consortium. How do you see these prospects, and do you see opportunities also for businesses and not only, you know, for citizens? And where do they come together? Or do they?
Under a social perspective, sharing energy could be an activity to enhance solidarity, dignity, but we need to enhance in the businessman the awareness about the no-profit goal of the community in the new regulatory framework. In the new regulatory framework, we have a definition, legal definition of poverty. We need to match the competitiveness habits of the actors, the business actor in the electricity market, in the energy market, with the new approach from Europe. In my experience, in our project, we have several meetings with company, small company, medium company in the south of Italy. We work in Madonie, in the south of Italy, in internal area, and we work with Federconsumatori in a little town near Roma. And in our meeting, we try to create a communication skill, a standard of communication, because in the vision of the business, energy community is an experience to receive money from public in this, for example, national grant or European grant, or support from a municipality, public authority. But the task of the research is to define a new vision in business. Only a new vision can give success and the future a long time in energy community.
Thanks very much, Lucia. Unfortunately, with a glance to the clock, we are running out of time. And I would like to give Radostina, okay, last quick remark by Radostina.
Yes,
yeah.
Something I wanted basically to add, an additional instrument that we right now currently have with the current multi-annual financial framework and the common provisions regulation, is in particularly with the European regional policy. The European Union is currently, for the next multi-annual financial period, will provide 330 billion for regional development. And in the common provisions regulation, there is one very important mechanism, Article 31 until 33, which is the so-called community-led development and local action groups. This is a voluntary provisions. However, very much municipalities, local action groups, it provides an additional incentive, because during the trialogue, an important deal that was chosen at that time is that member states who would like to implement this community-led development mechanism in their operational programs, and this type of community-led projects will get 10% more funding if they're based on community-led principles. So this is, and this sometimes depending on the region, it could be even 50%. So this is, I think, a very strong incentive, and needs to be, however, part of the, when these operational programs are being developed, that this is part of it there. There have been also evaluation of the previous programming funding period of this type of community-led developments, how they were applied, and the evaluation was very positive, that they were really responding to local needs. However, there are two challenges in this respect. The first is political will, because it needs to be used, and second, the implementation by public administrations, that they need to implement it. So, but basically local groups should be very much encouraged to use this and to know also about this tool.
I absolutely agree. Thanks, Radostina, for this valuable remark. I would like to, unfortunately, I have to close our panel discussions. I think we could go on for the next hour, because this is such a and not only pressing and urgent topic, but also likewise an interesting one. But I would like to give a critical thought, citing the work of Yuval Noah Harari, a historian that you may have heard of, who warns us about misperceptions of actually technology of progress. And in his works, amongst others, he describes the change from in human history from being gatherers and hunters to becoming settlers and farmers, which was always interpreted as a big progress, as a step forward. And in his work, he actually points out that this may not have been the case. On the contrary, that actually hunters and gatherers had probably better living conditions, and that the benefits of becoming settlers and farmers were actually the benefits of concentrated capital, because a few that were basically administrating the resources were the ones who were really benefiting. And that's what we see today also. I see the danger that with these enormous amounts of funding available, that there's a tendency or a possibility for further capital concentration, which would actually be totally detrimental to the objectives that we have discussed here. So the big question here is, how do we avoid this? And actually humankind, when not being anymore gatherer and hunters, really started to have the monopoly on accumulation, which animals don't do except for, you know, a few species like ants or bees, but those are very particular. But generally speaking, the ape troop, you know, when they kill a beast, everybody gets the food because it can't be stored. And once we started to store and to accumulate and to give possibility for concentration, these things changed, especially for a small group that was in power. And we see now that people who are getting richer and richer are actually doing private space flights, while energy poverty is actually not really decreasing. So with this hopefully not too pessimistic remark, I would like to close this very interesting panel discussion and thank the panelists for participating. I would still like to express my hope that projects like SCORE and projects like on energy citizenship, like the one that Thomas is running, would still be able to change this trend and maybe, you know, to give impulses to policy making and to businesses in order to revert this trend. And with this being said, I would also like to close this final SCORE conference, and I would like to thank the organizers. I would first of all, of course, like to thank the host, Patrizia, and your staff here at the Politecnico di Torino. It was a pleasure being here. I would, of course, also like to thank my staff that has been helping to organize this, all our SCORE partners, and last but not least, of course, the most important part, the audience. So thank you for being with us in these 2 days here. I hope we gave you inspiration for further work, and certainly we will be available for questions and queries after this event. You can contact us over social media and also the website or via email. And I hope that we will continue this discussion and hopefully also make some progress in the next years. Maybe Marie, as moderator, would like to add a final word with this being said. So from my side, thanks again.
Thank you, Jens.
Marie, are you still there? Oh, yes. Okay. So see, yeah. So Marie has already left us. So on behalf of and she wasn't feeling too well today. So on behalf of Marie, I would also like to thank the participants, and again, all our best wishes for the future, and goodbye, and looking forward to interchanging in the very near future. Bye bye.